And thanks everyone for attending. As Deb said, I think we all are looking forward to in-person events. Hopefully one day in the next couple of months, we will get back to that. So again, thanks for coming. For those that you don't know me, I want to say hello. I'm Angela DeMonbran. I am your current Environment Director, and I'm so excited to be introducing our speaker. I was also the former Jacksonville president. Linnell has taken it leaps and bounds, and we're so excited by her leadership in this board. Many of you on at this meeting today. Professionally, I also serve as I work with Solar United Neighbors. We are a national nonprofit. I am the Chief Operating Officer and the Regional Director overseeing a number of our states, and we help people make informed decisions around going solar. But specific to resilience, I am a Jacksonville native and have served as a volunteer as a subject matter expert with the city's Resiliency Committee on Infrastructure. So this is a personal passion of mine, and one thing that the league has been involved in as well. We want to help make our city resilient, and so we're super excited about our speaker today, our new Chief Resiliency Officer, Anne Coglianese, and so we're super excited to have her. And we will have a couple questions for Anne, but I do want Anne take a minute or two to introduce yourself, where you've come from, and briefly touch on your experience.
Well, thank you, Angela, and hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. Like Angela said, I'm Anne Coglianese. I'm the first Chief Resilience Officer for the city of Jacksonville. And I'm very happy to be here, not only with you, but here in Jacksonville and ready to get started on this important work. My background has been primarily in the field of resilience policy. It's the term you hear a lot. And when we're thinking in terms of city resilience, to me, what that means is how do we make sure our city systems are able to adapt and thrive given unknown future conditions. So that could mean a shock like a hurricane, that could be a stress like chronic rainfall or extreme heat. These are all the types of things that we want to make sure we're tackling, and not just addressing the risk, but really using it as an opportunity to create the type of city we want to see. So if we're going to be repaving a road, how do we also make sure that road is improving drainage in that neighborhood, is creating a cooling effect? So that's the kind of lens that I approach this work with. Before coming to Jacksonville, I served the city of New Orleans as their coastal resilience program manager. So I looked at everything from the levee system out in terms of wetland loss and sea level rise, and finding solutions like large scale coastal restoration projects to help protect the city. And I will say, given there was Hurricane Ida this week in New Orleans, there's certainly a lot of damage, and it's going to be a long recovery for folks across Southeast Louisiana. But the city of New Orleans did have some really big positive resilience wins. The levees held, their drainage system worked. They've taken a lot of steps to reduce flooding from rainfall events. And so I was very happy to see how some of those systems functioned, and am eager to bring some of the solutions that have worked there into Jacksonville and into the way that we approach flooding here in the city. And I'll also add that before I served New Orleans, I worked in the Obama White House, specifically focused on climate preparedness and resilience. So helping communities across the country tackle their climate challenges. Again, sea level rise, flooding, but also permafrost melt in Alaska and wildfires out west. And so I've really seen the full suite of this. And, I think the main thing is always, how do we proactively address these? If we wait until after a storm event or a tragedy has happened, it's going to be more expensive. It's going to cause increased disruptions for residents, for businesses. And there's just a lot more pain and loss through that process. So the best thing we can do is get ahead of this, create a plan, have a resilient strategy, and make sure that Jacksonville is really getting ready for unknown conditions. We're really seeing major changes in weather patterns, and it's encouraging that the city of Jacksonville is coming to the table and wanting to get ahead of this. So I'm excited to be here and help lead that effort.
Thanks, Anne. And I think I speak for the group overall and maybe the city. We're so excited to have you. I mentioned earlier privately that I think you're the most exciting municipal hire the city has seen. There's so much incredible excitement around you. So we're really excited to have you really take the lead on this and this incredible but large amount of work that needs to be done for our city to prepare us. So I have a couple questions. How do you see your role as it relates to the special committee on resiliency and the recommendations and actions they proposed?
So I see these two efforts as very symbiotic. I think the special committee really laid the groundwork for the type of resilience work that I'm hoping to now implement. And one of the top recommendations out of that effort that the city council underwent was the creation of a chief resilience officer. So I really see my role as kind of carrying out the mission that they were really focused on, and also combining that with ongoing efforts that are taking place in city departments and the vision and leadership of the mayor and his office to make sure that we're charting a course forward that's based on the best available science, the best available data, that's thinking innovatively, and that is really achieving multiple benefits with every new project that we're putting on the ground. So I see this as really carrying forward a lot of the recommendations that we saw in the special committee's report, but also really taking that next step and getting to implementation and getting to project scale solutions. So I think it's going to be a citywide effort, but the special committee certainly I think brought a lot of attention to this issue writ large, and I'm certainly grateful for the renewed focus on resilience that Jacksonville's underwent as a result of that effort.
Terrific. And a follow-up, resiliency, these matters are apolitical, we believe. Along those lines, are you finding, is this a partnership, a collaboration, or are you finding some competing interest and funding in your role?
I think it's a very collaborative process. Certainly not competitive. The idea is that any new project the city's putting out should have resilience components. So resilience isn't its own separate thing that's competing with other city interests. It's how do we bake resilience into how the city does its business as usual, and making sure that everything that comes out of the city is resilient. So we do have some special funding set aside for resilience projects. I think that's going to be very useful to us as we go after grants, and we might have a local match or cost share that we're responsible for. And so we do have specific funding for resilience, but my hope is that I'm able to help the planning department issue permits in a resilient way. I'm able to help the public works department design projects in a resilient way, and really work across city departments to make sure that resilience is how we're doing business day in and day out.
Terrific. I'm excited to hear that you'll be looking at these things. Resilience should be baked into our projects all around the city. So that's exciting. All right. So at this point, what do you see as your top 3 priorities for your new role?
Great question. The top priority for me is developing a comprehensive resilience strategy. So this is pretty standard practice for cities across the country. I'd like to see this as an opportunity to set a track for the city's resilience efforts for the next 5, 10, 20 years. And that's going to be a participatory planning process. We're going to want a lot of stakeholder input. So keep your eyes out for opportunities. I'm sure we'll be working together again. We really want to make sure that the resilience work is of the community and really achieving the outcomes that you all want to see. And then we're going to be pairing that with really savvy data and modeling. And so there's existing sea level rise data and tidal data and things of that nature that are available to us now through federal agencies. But we're also going to want to be pairing that with some state efforts to do dynamic modeling. So how do you run multiple threat scenarios simultaneously? And how does that change what the ultimate outcome looks like? And with flooding, that's a huge factor for us. So pairing kind of community vision with the best available science and data, that I think will give us a path forward for the types of big resilient infrastructure projects we want to see. It'll highlight problem areas, neighborhoods that might need neighborhood scale solutions, And so I'm hoping that as an outcome of this resilience strategy, we'll have a comprehensive project list. And again, this will be the guiding document for the next few decades of resilience planning. So that's the top priority. And within that, there are things that I would like to see really heavily amplified in that strategy. I want to make sure that we're implementing green infrastructure solutions across the city. That's one of the most seamless ways in my mind to address the issues that Jacksonville is seeing with chronic rainfall flooding and kind of that localized flooding that doesn't necessarily come from a tropical storm, but just your average summer rainstorm. So I'd like to see us get those green infrastructure solutions on the ground rapidly and deployed to a lot of different corners of the city. And then another priority, I'd like to see us take a look at how are new developments in Jacksonville resilient? So Jacksonville is fortunate in the sense that there's an urban core, but there's also a lot of open space, and that provides a lot of opportunity for us to build smart in the first place. Make sure that any new development that is coming online is resilient, it's hardened, it's not going to flood, and it's also not going to have adverse impacts to neighbors nearby. So those are just a couple of the things that I hope to be working on this year and in the next coming years, so that we make sure that the next 20 years are as resilient as possible.
Great. And a follow-up, your larger strategic plan that you're going to be working on, do you have an overall timeline or goal set for that yet?
It'll really vary, I think, on how quickly we can get some of this data and modeling done. I will say that I think a standard benchmark, I think most cities across the country have taken about a year to develop them. But we're certainly not going to be waiting for that strategy to get started on some of this resilience work. There are projects in the city's capital improvement plan that have resilience components, where we're adding resilience components to their design. And so I'm hoping we'll see things rolled out in the next year, as we're also taking that time to make sure that years down the road are really thoughtfully and strategically planned out. So keep your ears peeled for more information on specific timing, but I think it's going to be a comprehensive plan. It's going to need to be a comprehensive process to develop.
Okay. Do you feel you have the support? This is kind of similar to the first question, of the mayor, but also not just the mayor, the planning and development department to include funding?
Yes, the answer is a big yes. We were chatting about this before the call started, but I can't imagine a CRO in any other city in the country coming in with as much excitement around their work as I'm experiencing here in Jacksonville. The mayor has really tasked me with coming in eyes wide open and really assessing Jacksonville with new fresh eyes, and then making smart decisions. And as you mentioned earlier, smart decisions are not political. Reducing flooding, that's an apolitical outcome. Making sure that people have access to healthy, clean, sustainable neighborhood. That's something everyone wants to see. That's good for business. That's good for health. There are so many outcomes that come from that. So certainly on the mayor's side, feel very supported. And then the city departments are really already on board. So the planning and development department led an adaptation action area work group a couple of years ago that started to look at the coastal zone and vulnerable basins within the city to flooding, and are very eager to kind of take the next steps to make sure that all of their practices in the planning department are resilient. And same with public works, same with emergency preparedness. It seems like all hands are on deck within the city. And then I'm really grateful that there are so many community partners that seem very interested in this work. So even outside of city government, there are a lot of nonprofit organizations such as yours that are really eager to hear about this work, to get involved in this work, that have been tracking resilience for years and now want to share that information with the city as we get started on our planning process. And so yes, I would say overall, this work seems very supported. And certainly, as we talked about earlier, the city council is fully on board. So I feel very fortunate to be coming into this role at this time when there is so much enthusiasm around it.
So great to hear. All right, at this stage, how do you assess all of Jacksonville's problems regarding resiliency?
Well, it's a big city. It's the largest city in the country, so it's certainly no small feat. And I think the way I'm approaching it is I'm currently, it's only been a couple of weeks, so I'm currently really focused on understanding the environmental landscape of the city first and foremost. So where is our flood risk? What are our natural assets that we already have? Our salt marshes near the mouth of the St. Johns River. What sections of the river have bulkheads and other flood protection. I think understanding where we are right now statically then will allow me to add in data layers, modeling on where we could see that change take place. And then, of course, to make something truly resilient, you have to make sure that it's interacting with the social and the political systems, the economic systems in Jacksonville. And so I'm hoping in the coming months to be able to start getting a better picture of, the socioeconomic factors around different neighborhoods that might be experiencing flooding, and making sure that any intervention that we put in place is not just tackling the physical risk, but also making sure that we're making positive improvements overall. So it's going to be a mix of community engagement, technical science and data, and then time, I think, for me to get up to speed and to really get a holistic picture of the work.
Terrific. We want to be extra supportive of the community efforts as you need to roll them out. So definitely feel free to reach out. So this is an interesting question. So why do you feel you're the candidate chosen to address resiliency in Jacksonville?
Well, I feel very fortunate to be here. I will say that in my conversations with the mayor leading up to being hired, I think one of the assets that he was really excited by is the fact that I have this DC lens, but then I've also worked in one of the most vulnerable cities in the world, frankly. So bringing in on the ground experiences in New Orleans as they recovered from Hurricane Katrina and put in interventions to make sure that type of flooding never happens again. And also as they started to reckon with these increased summer rainstorms that are not dropping inches and a number of inches over the course of a day, but really 6 to 7 inches in an hour or two. And that's a really big difference, the time scale of these rainfall events. And they really reacted and put in a lot of green infrastructure, improved drainage and pumping, and seeing some of that work happen up close while also serving the city's kind of larger regional efforts on sea level rise and coastal restoration. I think that those two lenses make me pretty uniquely prepared for Jacksonville, which, you have the localized neighborhood level flooding that you need to address, but Jacksonville is massive. It's the size of a county. And so how do we make sure that interventions are able to be equitably distributed across the city, that we're looking at large scale nature-based solutions, salt marshes, the St. Johns River, but we're also dealing with kind of the lot by lot chronic neighborhood flooding. And so certainly my time in New Orleans, I think lends a lot of expertise to that. And then, of course, my time in DC, seeing how different federal agencies are baking resilience into how they do business, how they think about issuing grants and what they're looking for when local communities apply for grants, I think will help. I'm optimistic that that'll help us secure more federal and hopefully state funding to support the resilience work that we're going to need going forward. So I feel very fortunate to be here in Jacksonville, very excited by the challenges that Jacksonville has. I think that there's a lot of really interesting work that needs to happen, and I'm very excited to be the one spearheading that, and hopeful that my past experience can be really an asset to Jacksonville as the city starts to explore what are its next steps to make sure that its future is strong.
So Angela, we have a number of questions that have been posted in the chat that I think we thought you and Anne could see, but perhaps can't.
I am actually not able to see them, but if you're able to read them out, we could kind of go that way.
I cannot see them. I apologize.
Technology fails us. I'll be glad to. So the first question, Anne, is it seems that development doesn't always use best resiliency practices. How do you plan to overcome that?
It's a great question, and it's true. It's going to need to be again, I'm all about participation. I want to make sure everyone feels like they have a voice. So we're certainly going to need to engage the development community in Jacksonville and understand where their apprehensions are around resilience. But I also like to bust the myth that resilience is, tree hugging and therefore inherently anti-development and anti-business. I think factoring in the realities of your environment can only ultimately be a plus to business. So we would hate to see a new development come in and experience significant flooding that damages that property or properties before the developer is able to recoup the financial burden of building that. So we really hope that any kind of land use or zoning improvements that we make will really help facilitate smart building and smart development in Jacksonville. We don't want to see this as something that is, putting up, it's not unnecessary roadblocks, they're safety checks to make sure that everyone benefits. And another thing that I really hope that we can address is making sure that there is a step in the permitting process that allows us to analyze what a new development will do to surrounding areas. I would also hate to see a new development come in and be high and dry and everyone who lives there safe, but have it, regularly flooding existing developments surrounding it. So this is something that's top of mind to me, and I know that the planning department is primed and ready to start digging into. But we hope that that'll be something we can work with the development community on, not have it be something that they see as burdensome, but really something that is a benefit to their process as well, to make sure that they're building something that is smart and that will withstand the kind of unknown storm future that Jacksonville's seeing.
Thank you. The next question is, can you give us an example of some of the green infrastructure strategies that you mentioned earlier?
Sure. Well, green infrastructure is a big term and it can mean a lot of things. On a homeowner level, you can implement a bioswale or a rain garden, areas that can retain water when a storm is happening. It could be a rain barrel. That's a form of a green infrastructure solution on kind of a lot by lot level, but they can also be massive. You can look at, you could take an entire city block and you could add in bioswales or essentially retention areas along the curb that can collect water. Any green infrastructure feature is essentially aimed at holding rainwater for a period of time, allowing your drainage system to catch up. So you minimize street flooding, home flooding, car flooding. And then after that storm event has passed, wherever that green infrastructure is holding the water can slowly release it either into the ground, into the storm drain. And then now once the drainage system has the capacity, it can kind of tackle that. So it's a really great way to address the flooding that we're seeing from just too much rain too quickly. And there's a lot of different skills that can be deployed, and it'll just look different depending on the kind of the features available in the neighborhood, the space that we have, the kind of public right of way that we're able to work with. But I'm hoping that this is kind of an area of solution that we can implement far and wide in Jacksonville and really use as much public space as we can to capture rainwater and to prevent flooding.
Thank you. All right, the next question is, what is your relationship with emergency management and planning offices of the various military installations in our area?
It's a great question. I mean, the military really sees climate change as a threat multiplier. So they're taking it very seriously, and they want to make sure that their bases are hardened and resilient. And certainly here in Jacksonville, that's a fixture of the economy, and we want to work as collaboratively as possible with the military installations that are here in Jacksonville. I think they're ripe and open for this conversation, and are eager for us to go after federal grant opportunities to put in solutions in and around their bases to prevent some of this flooding, and hopefully to make sure that they're able to operate here in perpetuity. So around, Mayport, looking at how do we make improvements to living shoreline features and marshes there to absorb storm surge and reduce flooding. Similarly, NAS Jax is in an area that has experienced a lot of chronic flooding due to rainfall events. So how are we implementing green infrastructure solutions? These are all things that we're going to explore and work collaboratively with the bases here in Jacksonville to make sure they're addressed. And as far as emergency management, the emergency management department here in the city is very eager for this, but also recognizing that if a storm were to happen today, they have emergency procedures covered. My job is to think about how can I make sure that they're dealing with less risk going forward. So we recognize that we're going to see more storm events. They know how to get people in safe places during storms. And my hope is just to make sure that the level of threat that they face from those storms is reduced.
Thank you. I've got a couple more, Angela, and then I'll turn it back over to you for your list. The next question is, whether you research the history of pollution in Jacksonville, chemical dumping, et cetera, in order to plan for resiliency for the city. How does that play in? Do you have to plan to remediate or restore certain areas first?
It's definitely a step in the process. So it kind of on a project scale, if we're looking at implementing a green infrastructure solution, we have to look into the soil quality and what it was used there before. If there's any toxins, yes, remediation is essential before you put in a green infrastructure feature. The last thing we would want to do is have a resilience project lead to chemicals and pollution leaching into drinking water supplies. So absolutely, to prevent kind of adverse reactions, you do look into that. And also, on a larger scale, pollution in the St. John's and in the marshes is very important to make sure that those are healthy, vibrant ecosystems, because we know that healthy ecosystems can absorb a lot of storm surge and a lot of flood water. So that's really an asset to us in a resilience lens.
Thank you. And the last one I have is that our city has experienced racial, environmental negative impact in the past. Will you be meeting with minority community leaders as you start planning with the city?
Yes, absolutely. And I think my hope is that this work can really be deployed in an equitable way. We would like to see, I'd like to see this work really enhance communities that perhaps feel they've been invested in less in the past. I'd like to see this kind of right historic wrongs. And certainly when you look at lower income or minority communities, you see usually higher urban heat and higher rates of flooding. And so it's my hope that this work can really center around lifting up vulnerable communities. And the only way to do that is to have it be participatory. So there will certainly be opportunities where I will be engaging with stakeholders, with community leaders across the city, but especially in vulnerable and minority communities.
Okay, and I do want to call out Barbara Govin. She's on, and for some reason I can't respond to her in the chat. So Barbara, why don't if you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and just ask directly.
Thank you so much. I couldn't figure out how to send the question. Just to put this in context, I'm very active with our local Sierra Club, the Northeast Sierra Club group, and I chair their political committee. And there's a huge issue in Florida about our legislature preempting local government from doing things that local government has either already done in relation to the environment, or local government expressing interest. And I'm talking about tree ordinances. I'm talking about making decisions about plastics, single-use plastics. I'm talking about making decisions about requiring renewable energy in new construction. All of these were bills that preempted those decisions being made by local government in our most recent legislative session. And I'm just wondering what Anne has done and to what extent she's aware of that, and what plans she's making to help educate our local state representatives and senators on how important it is not only to pat ourselves on the back and say we're trying to be a resilient community, but that we have to stop the changes in climate. We've got to go all the way back and limit carbon emissions and enable local government to make those decisions if our state is not willing or able to do so. So that's a tough question. You're really, really new to Jacksonville. Just so you know, I personally worked for the city of Jacksonville for almost 13 years. So I'm very familiar with how the city works, but I wonder if you're aware of that and what kinds of conversations you're planning to have or have had with Bill Killingsworth, with the mayor and others about this huge issue that we find ourselves in with our state, which isn't very environmentally conscious, let's say. So a long question, but I'd like to hear kind of your thoughts on that.
Well, thank you. And there's a lot in that question, so I'll try to get to as much of it as I can. I will say I'm still in the early stages of onboarding and getting up to speed here, so I haven't had any direct conversations with state representatives or state senators yet, but I look forward to working with them. And I agree that this work does really need to happen at all levels of government. And I'm optimistic that we'll be able to make a lot of progress in the resilience space, given federal support for this and federal agencies really taking this seriously. I also see, the state for maybe having a tumultuous past with environmental issues, previously, does seem to be taking resilience seriously and does seem to understand that climate change is posing risks. And the Department of Environmental Protection, seems to be very eager to support local governments in their resilience efforts and to advance them forward. And actually just right now, today, there is a grant opportunity closing that Jacksonville will be going after, resilience funding from the state to support resilience infrastructure and resilience planning. And so I think if there is kind of that past tension between local governments and the state in terms of environmental issues, I'm optimistic that we will at least be able in the resilience space to make a lot of headway, and they're making funding and resources available to us and allowing us to work collaboratively with them. So I hope that's something that I'm able to bring in front of Jacksonville's state representatives and make sure that they're aware of kind of what we need from the state and ways that we can expand this work and really push the envelope. But at least within the city, within the planning department, Bill Killingsworth and the mayor, everyone is on the same page that climate change is happening in real time, and we need to be prepared for that. So I'm not coming from Florida. I heard, that Florida, you couldn't say climate change. So I remember one of my first days here in the office, just, hey, Mayor Curry, can I say sea level rise? Can I say climate change? And he said, absolutely. And I need you to. So at least within City Hall, within Jacksonville, everyone is really taking this seriously and really wants to see us put resilience initiatives on the ground that make sure Jacksonville is prepared for the impacts of climate change. And I really hope that we can extend that to elected officials at the state level, and certainly seek out, federal agency support as we take on these initiatives.
That is so great to hear, Anne. So we're getting there. I think a lot of us that have been working on environmental issues overall have long wanted the city to even have this discussion. So yes, there still remains a lack of information or discussion around mitigation and climate change and why we're here today. But if that conversation can come along with the discussion of resiliency, okay. And I did want to, and I think we're running a little low on time, and please ping me if there's additional questions the chat because I can't see them. So, but Anne, I work very closely with a number of sustainability departments throughout the state. And some of them kind of have a dual role with regard to resiliency planning too. And I wonder if you have connected with whether it's the Sustainability Directors Network or if there's a separate like Chief Resiliency Officer network type of, and I say that, one, have you been able to connect with them? I'd be happy to help you on that front. And two, there's so many incredible models too out there that could help you with your overall strategic plan for the city. That certainly I'm thinking of like our Miami area and that network.
Yes, and so I'm kind of as an ever evolving process, getting connected with more and more CROs across the country, specifically trying to connect with the ones in Florida who have been able to put successful resilience initiatives on the ground in this state. But, you know, I do know a number of CROs across the city, and I'm really hoping to draw on them for best practices. And then in my time in New Orleans, I also served on an international flood work group. So when I'm thinking of resilience and when I'm thinking of best practices, it's not even limited to this country. The Netherlands, Copenhagen, Venice, London, Rio, there are cities across the world that are really all having to address these issues. And so I'm hoping that Jacksonville can work really collaboratively with folks that have already done this work other places, learn what worked well, learn what didn't, make sure that we avoid mistakes that others have made, and make sure that we're not missing out on the low-hanging fruit or easy solutions that other folks have found successful. So I'm really hoping that this can be implementation of some of the best ideas globally, and certainly I plan to stay in contact with as many CROs as possible to make sure that we're informed in our approach here.
Terrific. And I think final question, how can we help you?
Well, there are going to be a number of steps in the resilience strategy development process where I'm expecting we will have stakeholder engagement. And so I will plan to stay in touch and let you all know when those opportunities become available. And I certainly welcome your feedback and want to make sure that the strategy we're putting together and the plan that we have going forward is really built on the ideas of the community, and certainly the League of Women Voters is such an engaged group, and so I would want to make sure that you are all at the table for those types of conversations. So I'll make sure to circle back once we have kind of the strategy process underway, and once we have a better sense of where and how that stakeholder engagement is going to take place, and make sure that anyone who wants to be involved is able to.
Perfect. Great to hear. And I did fail to mention that we are part of a larger coalition, Riverfront Parks Now, which I believe you've already been introduced to and familiar with. Part of a larger coalition, we want to see more green spaces that also have a resiliency factor and can, have dual roles. So we're really we're excited to be a part of that coalition. So I'm sure our paths will cross many times thereafter. And
that's fantastic to hear.
Absolutely. And so thank you, Anne. And I want to kick it back to Deb or Linnell.